Welcome to Interview from Mexico. I'm Laura Carlson and I'll be your host as we look at cutting-edge issues with the people who know them best. Here on Telesur. Mexico is facing massive protests and a full-on challenge to its political system for the Ayotzinapa case. On September 26th, 6 people were killed and 43 students were forcibly disappeared. The 43 students were last seen in police custody. We know this. But amid varying versions, what's the truth? And what comes next for the movement, for the students, and for the nation? We're here in the headquarters of the Democratic Current of the National Teachers Union in Mexico City. And to talk about the Ayotzinapa case, we're very privileged to have with us today Marco Granados from the Rural Teachers College in Michoacán, and Carlos Perez Diaz from Ayotzinapa, a second-year student and a survivor of the attacks. Thank you so much for being with us here today.
Muchas gracias.
To begin, I wanted to ask you, the government is saying that the case of Ayotzinapa is a problem of Iguala Guerrero and a problem of organized crime. But you say that it's a crime of the state. Why?
First, it's a crime of the state because municipal police were involved. Also, at specific moments, other forces were approached for help, including the state police, the federal police, and even soldiers who have a base just 2 kilometers from the place where the shootout against us occurred.
Were the soldiers actually at the scene of the crime?
En su momento, en la primera balacera, en cuanto se pide el apoyo, no recibimos el apoyo de ninguna fuerza policíaca. Hasta en el segundo ataque que sufrimos, alrededor de las 12 de la noche, es cuando los militares ya cuando empiezan a dar sus rondines y cuando los compañeros llegan a los hospitales llevando a los compañeros heridos, los acusaban de un allanamiento a las mismas instalaciones, por el cual estaban forzando a que los compañeros pues abandonaran esas instalaciones, sabiendo igual de que pues había compañeros gravemente heridos, los cuales requerían una atención médica inmediata. A pesar de ello, pues hacen caso omiso y forzaban a que los compañeros abandonaran esas instalaciones.
So then for you, this participation of the state would be an example of how this goes beyond an isolated incident?
Well, mainly because of that, and also because at the time when we put out a call, in this case to the reporters, so we could make a declaration about what had happened, what they mentioned at the time is that there was a state order saying that they shouldn't go to the scene of the incident. So the only ones who responded were alternative media. Equally, there's the argument that the classmates who arrive at the hospital say there was an order on the part of the state that they shouldn't allow them access. Even so, the students go in, asking for help above all, so later the soldiers get there and accuse them of rape.
Marco, I wanted to ask you, the rural teaching colleges immediately offered their solidarity and became very involved with the disappearance of the 43 students. Why was that? Why did this immediately seem like such an important issue to the rest of you?
Well, for us, we're part of a national organization that groups 16 rural teachers' colleges in the whole country, which are all of them that currently exist. And precisely our organization makes us brothers and sisters. Brothers and sisters in struggle and in friendship and in work, and brothers and sisters in our labor in the future as teachers. And precisely all the colleges shared this reality and practically all helped out. It wasn't just Ayotzinapa. It wasn't just Tiripetío. It wasn't just Panotla. It was more rural colleges in all the whole country, and more schools that are organized in the states of each resident college. And precisely every rural college in its way helps out and shows its solidarity and shows its outreach. Because it's just that. We don't see it as a case of just Ayotzinapa. It's a case against rural education. It's a case against the students of the whole country. And it's the indignation because there are colleagues at rural colleges. There are colleagues in the same career. And we're following the same dream and trying to make this country better.
So do you feel threatened by the fact that these students were killed and disappeared in Ayotzinapa?
Yes, well, Ayotzinapa is one case, a recent case. But this harassment on the part of the government against the rural teachers has always existed. Ayotzinapa was a case, say, in a greater degree, since there are classmates dead and classmates disappeared. But you know, it's worth pointing out that other rural colleges also have these kind of problems. There are fellow students who are repressed by the police forces, both municipal and federal, who are beat up, and they insult us, and they even take us as prisoners. Now they are disappeared, and the state wants to criminalize us. It wants to wash its hands of the case, saying it's organized crime, but this is nothing new for us.
Well, now President Peña Nieto has said that there are parts of the movement in support of Ayotzinapa that are trying to destabilize his project for the nation, to destabilize Mexico itself. What do you think of that?
Unfortunately, the state has just decided to play around in a supposed surge, for which in all the meetings, or rather the sessions of dialogue that we have had with them, they just stall and don't mention specific responses or any clues. There are a lot of individuals arrested, but because of the media attention, they don't give a clear response, so a lot of people are indignant for everything that has happened and still is happening. That's why there's this mobilization, and this mobilization will continue because the majority is fed up with all the systematic repression that we have experienced.
Porque la mayoría ya están cansados, ¿no?, de toda esta represión sistemática que ha habido. Igual de que pues
And the majority has understood that if we don't stop this right now, at a later time will be the next case, or our children will be the next case.
o nuestros hijos serían un caso más.
Carlos, Marco, we're going to take a short break now. We'll be right back. We're back in the Teachers Union offices in Mexico City talking about the crime of Ayotzinapa with Marco Granados and Carlos Perez Diaz. One thing I want to ask you is why this attack on the teachers' colleges in particular? Can you tell us a little about those colleges?
Yes, well, it's worth pointing out that the rural colleges come out of the post-revolutionary era. After the Mexican Revolution, the people don't have hardly any jobs, they have very little education, and everything is broken down. The rural colleges are founded in 1922, with the first rural college in Tacumbaro, Michoacán. These rural colleges sought to provide an education, but an education beyond the classrooms, an education where people are trained both academically and in job skills and professionally. So these rural colleges arise with Mr. Vasconcelos and his slogan, alphabet, bread, and soap. His reasoning was that a really complete education had to include food, hygiene, and education. And so these three had to come together in a truly good education. The rural colleges since then, and up to now, have operated like this. In the decade of the 20s, there were around 34 in the whole country, and now there are 17, because they have been systematically closing them down.
Carlos, can you tell us a little about the case of Ayotzinapa in particular?
As my friend Marco mentioned before me, the education that we get in these rural colleges is an integral part. So that we, rural college students who come from these poor rural areas, recognize that this is really needed. Because there are needs. These places lack almost everything. You don't have access to education, you don't have access to health, you don't have access to security itself. So we see that's really indispensable that these rural colleges continue to fight back, continue to struggle so that they don't close down these rural colleges. Every single year, the rural college at Ayotzinapa has faced repression. In 2007, they closed down the dining hall. In 2011, they tried to shut down new inscriptions.
Who? You mean the state government?
Exactly, the state government, because they are determined to abolish the rural colleges. So the students, to keep them from eliminating inscriptions for the incoming class, began a series of mobilizations, starting with suspension of activities to, right before the school year ended, deciding to put up a roadblock on the Acapulco freeway. Well, their position was not to leave this place until there was a dialogue established with the governor. The governor, what he does at this time, speaking of the guy who has forced out of office, Ángel Aguirre, was that instead of establishing a dialogue, he sends out a brutal repression. They evict our fellow students, they open fire on them, precisely the ministerial police, and they assassinate 2 of our companions. For years, they have been criminalizing us, denigrating us, to such a degree that on the day of January 7, we were asking drivers for donations. January 7 of 2014, in the region of Costa Chica. And that's when, again, we suffer an attack in which a trailer truck carrying heavy material goes by and runs over 7 of our classmates. 5 of them were seriously wounded, and 2, unfortunately, lost their lives.
So it didn't seem like an accident?
Well, that it seemed like an accident, no. It seemed like it was, more than anything, planned by the state. The cases I have mentioned to you have never been prosecuted. They've never been ignored. There hasn't been any justice in this case. And so, given the context of impunity that exists in the state of Guerrero, because likewise, there have been a lot of extrajudicial executions of grassroots leaders, and seeing that nothing is done about the situation, on this day of September 26, 2014, we once again suffer repression by the state.
Well, we're going to come right back to that after a short pause. We'll be right back to talk about Ayotzinapa. We're back with Marco Granados and Carlos Perez Diaz to talk about what happened on the night of September 26th. The general situation of violence in the country, of course, has gotten much worse, and it's especially obvious in the states of Michoacán and in Guerrero. How has this affected your schools, and how did it affect what happened on the night of September 26th?
Yes, well, the situation that you mentioned, the war on drugs precisely, it unleashes a series of violent acts. And with all the images, you get used to seeing violence and begin to see it as something natural, something normal. It's worth mentioning, for example, before Ayotzinapa in Ciudad Juárez, Chihuahua, thousands of women were killed, and nobody did anything because it became something normal, something routine. To see the news with people dead from bullets of organized crime, kidnappings, all these extortions. And the people themselves began to accept this situation in the society. But yes, the violence that we experience here and the harassment that we receive every day is a lot. It's a lot, and the people to a certain point see it as normal. But precisely the harassment continues. We saw it here on November 20th of this year. Yeah, it was November 20th when there's the march in support of the students of Ayotzinapa here in Mexico City. Some protesters are taken prisoner from other universities in Mexico, and 11 of them are processed in maximum security prisons. And because they're accused of attempted homicide and other things that have nothing to do with the situation or why they take these people. And so then we see the other side of the former mayor of Iguala, José Luis Abarca. He's just put under house arrest and then taken to jail. when he's the mastermind of the assassination of 3 students and another 3 civilians in the same attack of September 26th, and the disappearance of 43 of our classmates. This is sort of the contrast, the counterpart we see here in Mexico. For those who protest for their rights, they put in prisons of maximum security, and those who attack the society are merely booked and arrested and don't go through that process. That's kind of the counterpart, no? The process that we have here in Mexico, the policies, the system that we have, where the one who kills because he's a mayor and part of the government isn't accused of anything, and the people, civilians, who fight for their rights, who defend their rights, are in prisons of maximum security. That's a small illustration, maybe to understand the situation of the country from today and looking back.
It's a terrible contradiction.
For many years now, insecurity has been a part of life in the state of Guerrero. It's what reigned mainly. There was a degree of ingovernability on the part of the state, where one already couldn't tell where public security started, where public security itself ended, and where drug trafficking organizations and organized crime began and where it ended. To such a degree that the same communities where these injustices were committed, of disappearances, of extrajudicial executions, create their own community police. There's the crack, to give an example. The UPOEG, they are providing security for their own people.
En efecto, lo que pretendían realizar para nosotros pues es darle entrada, darle más auge al narcotráfico, porque pues a la hora de que se militarizaba esta zona del estado de Guerrero, pues es cuando se veía más la presencia del narcotráfico, de la delincuencia organizada. Tal parece de que los principales o quienes movían a estas personas pues eran estos, la militarización.
For this, it gave reasons for the villages themselves to take their own security into their own hands.
Su propia seguridad, se la brinden a sí mismos, y por ello pues se emprendieron igual una serie de acciones para seguir garantizándole, en este caso, el trabajo al narcotráfico,
and so a series of actions were undertaken to continue to guarantee, in this case,
las acciones
the
que
work of drug
emprenden hacia
trafficking.
estos the work of organized crime.
The actions that are undertaken against these persons who are trying to provide security in their communities is direct repression. They arrest grassroots leaders of these organizations, the community police. They assassinate
y en
some leaders.
todas estas injusticias que se ha cometido ante los pueblos de donde provenimos, pues nosotros lo sentimos, sobre todo porque pues entendemos de que están nuestros familiares allí. Nosotros en un próximo momento iríamos a parar ahí como maestros o como personas, igual pues nuestros hijos precisamente van a necesitar de este apoyo por parte de la comunidad, por el cual nosotros en el momento de que realizan alguna serie de movilizaciones, sobre todo para exigir justicia, nosotros participamos y le decimos pues las cosas como son al Estado, y pues tal parece que es lo que más le duele, ¿no? De que nosotros, ha habido personas quienes han salido de esta normal rural, quienes han dado pues una concientización al mismo pueblo para que se organice y exija sus derechos. Principalmente por esto sentimos nosotros que nos dan esta represión del día 26 para callar todas las voces de la protesta social que hay en el estado de Guerrero.
It's why they attacked on the 26th. To silence all these voices of social protest that exist in the state of Guerrero, and not just in Guerrero, in the whole country.
Do you think that this has something to do with the fact that this movement has grown so large with hundreds and thousands of people in the streets protesting?
Sí, precisamente, ¿no? El gobierno actualmente
Yes, definitely. The current government, in going back, has always sought to impose. It imposes its reforms, it imposes its laws, and the people who protest or demonstrate against them, they try to silence them, to harass them. A clear case, for example, is what happened in Ayotzinapa, is the student who's found tortured without a face. This, for people who protest, for us rural college students, is a very strong message, because it says to us, this can happen to any of you. Because it's not just that they can repress you or beat you up, but they'll take your life. With this exactly, they want to put a brake on this wave, because there's a lot of discontent, a lot of disgust with the government. And not just this one, but previous ones as well, that have been doing just this, playing with the society, sidelining it, without taking into account precisely all the shortages it faces and the real needs that people have. Precisely, that's their duty, to assure the well-being of the state, the well-being people to create some things. But they create things without caring about the people.
Carlos, you lived through the terror of the attacks and the massacre on the 26th of September, and yet you're still in this movement, and you're speaking to us today and to people all over the country. How do you do it? How do you think that you can move forward from this point on?
Pues primeramente,
mainly because we arrive at these places, at these rural colleges, with a dream of making more of ourselves, not just ourselves as individuals, but to make something of ourselves along with our families, because it's very difficult for someone who comes from where we come from to make it.
Pues es muy difícil de que uno que provenga de estos lugares donde
And
somos
so,
nosotros pueda
these rural
salir
colleges for us represent a hope, and our classmates, we understand that it's not just 43 lives that have been denied their liberty, but rather it's 43 families that have had, in a way, their possibilities of getting ahead cut off, their hopes of having a better future.
La posibilidad de poder sobresalir, la posibilidad de tener un mejor futuro.
This fills us with indignation, and for many people, what happened fills them with indignation. And so, for this reason, we have decided to go out and look for our classmates, precisely because we understand that it's not just 43 persons.
Marco, Carlos, thanks so much for being with us today. And thanks to you. We'll be back next week on Interview from Mexico.